The air in the Nevada Desert Control Bunker tasted of stale coffee and static electricity. Dr. Gap Aris Thorne watched the main screen, her fingers steepled under her chin. The warp-shear experiment was the pinnacle of her life's work, a desperate gamble to prove her theories on localized space-time manipulation. The goal was to fold a tiny region of space, moving a probe a mere 1,000 kilometers instantly. The massive ring of superconducting magnets hummed, power drawn from 3 dedicated fusion grids.
"Initiate final sequence," she said, her voice calm, belying the tremor in her hands. The countdown echoed.
At 0, the ring flared with impossible light, but the readouts spiraled into madness. Instead of a controlled pinch, the sensors reported a tear. On the visual feed, the sky above the ring didn't just warp, it cracked like an eggshell, revealing not the expected desert vista on the other side, but a swirling vortex of radiant blues and golds, stabilizing into a perfect, silent circle. Through it, they could see a complex of sleek organic spires under a violet sky, and in the foreground, hovering just on the other side of the gateway, was a vessel shaped like a smooth gemstone, covered in faintly glowing runes. Panic was instant. Military lockdowns were initiated. Global leaders were roused from sleep. The object on the other side did not move, but a complex pulse of multi-wavelength light emitted from it, washing over the research facility. Linguistics algorithms and AI translation suites designed for human dialects whirred uselessly. Then, a simple repeating image was broadcast on every screen, a circle of 12 stars, with a 13th star entering the circle. After 72 hours of silent standoff, a smaller craft, a shuttle, emerged from the gem ship and passed through the gateway. It settled on the scorched sand with impossible grace. The being that emerged was tall, willowy, with iridescent skin and large, dark eyes. It wore no obvious suit, the atmosphere seemingly compatible. It held a device that projected a field around it. A voice, synthesized and strangely melodic, spoke in English. Identify governance locus for System Sol 3. This was how first contact happened, not with a brave voyage to the stars, but with a catastrophic lab accident in the desert. A stunned UN delegation, cobbled together in record time, met the emissary, who introduced itself as Envoy Kale of the Galactic Council. The Hypergate, Kale explained, was a fundamental technology of civilized space. They were ancient, fixed points, and creating a new one was a controlled, millennia-long process. What humanity had done was the equivalent of smashing a hole through the load-bearing wall of a galactic apartment building. The shockwave of its formation had been felt across council space. By precedent of the Citadel Charter, Kale intoned, its voice carrying a weight of endless bureaucracy, the faction that creates a stable Hypergate, regardless of intent or method, is granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council. Humanity, it seemed, had just applied for a club membership by accidentally setting off the club's fire alarm and welding a new front door onto the building. The associated territories were the kicker, the Hypergate's effective zone of control, by ancient law extended to the edge of humanity's dominant stellar sphere, which, since they hadn't left their own system, was just the solar system. But the gate itself was now a prime piece of interstellar real estate, a new junction point. Every species in the local cluster would want access, would want to negotiate, would want to know who these reckless apes were who built a back door into their neighborhood. Aris Thorne stood before the UN Security Council, feeling smaller than she had in the desert bunker. She saw not awe in the faces of the world's leaders, but terror and a dawning greedy calculation. They were children who had found a live grenade and a deed to a continent in the same box. The envoy waited, patient and inscrutable. Humanity had to decide, accept a seat at a table they didn't understand, surrounded by beings millennia ahead of them, or try to refuse and be subject to the laws and judgments of that same table anyway, now as a rogue entity. The gamble had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, and in doing so had placed all of humanity on the highest stakes table in the known galaxy. The first month was a hurricane of alien bureaucracy. The evaluation was a gentle term for a grueling, omnipresent audit. council liaisons, a diplomatic corps of various species including the logical Verax, the amphibious Toka, and the serene, plant-like Silvery, arrived in droves. They examined everything: historical records, cultural artifacts, legal systems, environmental policies, even popular entertainment. Human networks were flooded with galactic data packets containing council law, history, and technology primers. The gap was not just technological, it was philosophical. Galactic society was ancient, stable, and deeply conservative. Innovation was slow, measured over centuries. Risk was anathema. Humanity, with its chaotic, explosive, and often violent history, was a shocking outlier. The shock was mutual. Humans learned that most spacefaring species had evolved in less competitive biospheres or had undergone genetic pacification millennia ago to ensure social stability. The concept of a world war horrified them. Yet, they were equally fascinated by human arts, our music, our relentless drive to make and do. Envoy Kale, assigned as humanity's primary guide, observed a marathon you run until your bodies fail, for no resource, for no tactical advantage, only to see if you can go faster than before. This is illogical. But there is a beauty in the struggle. The first major crisis came from an unexpected direction: trade. A species called the Krell, predatory capitalists with a brusque manner, demanded exclusive Hypergate toll rights, citing an obscure subclause about developing species and infrastructural stewardship. Their offer was generous in technology, but would have made humanity a client state. The UN panicked. Their diplomats, skilled in human politics, were out of their depth in galactic legalese. It was Iris Thorne, working with a team of programmers and a historian specializing in archaic contract law, who found a solution. They didn't fight the clause. Instead, they cross-referenced it with the older, foundational Compact of Free Passage, which guaranteed access to all council gates in times of regional crisis. They then presented data pulled from human astronomical surveys on gravitational wave anomalies in a nearby sector the Krell mined. They argued not that the Krell were wrong, but that granting exclusivity might technically impede a future crisis response, creating liability. It was a bluff woven from human cunning, legalistic creativity, and a deep dive into rules the Krell assumed humans couldn't possibly understand. The Krell withdrew, annoyed but respecting the sharp, if primitive, maneuver. News of the human gambit spread through diplomatic channels. Humanity wasn't just reckless, they were unpredictably clever. The real test was not diplomatic, but physical. A cosmic event, a subspace filament surge, threatened to destabilize a Hypergate 3 gates away in a system inhabited by the fragile Silvery. Standard protocol was a gradual energy damping procedure that would take weeks, during which the Silvery homeworld would be bombarded with lethal radiation. The Council mobilized a fleet of great damping ships, but they would arrive too late to prevent massive loss of Silvery life. The human delegation, watching the crisis unfold on the galactic net, saw a different solution. Dr. Thorne proposed using the very same experimental warp shear technology that made the gate, in a targeted, microscopic scale, to create a temporary pressure valve in the filament, bleeding off the destructive energy into empty space. It was risky. It was using the hammer that broke the wall to perform surgery. The Council Science Directorate rejected it outright as barbarically dangerous. But the Silvery, facing extinction, asked to hear the humans. In a desperate conference, Aris and her team, using simple metaphors of plumbing and pressure cookers, explained their plan. It was not elegant. It was a calculated brute force fix. With no other option, the Council, with extreme reluctance, granted permission for a single, monitored attempt. A modified human ship, jury-rigged with the warp shear apparatus and piloted by a volunteer crew, jumped to the crisis site. Council fleets watched from a safe distance, expecting a spectacular failure. The human ship fired its device not at the gate, but at the raging filament itself. Space twisted and screamed. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the instability would worsen. Then, with a flash that blinded sensors, the filament vented. The surge dissipated. The gate stabilized. The silvery world was safe. The ship returned, scorched and battered, to a silent council fleet. Then, across every channel, the Silvery broadcast a simple, powerful message of gratitude, not just to their governments, but to the human crew by name. The footage of the desperate, scrappy human vessel taking on a cosmic storm while advanced fleets watched helplessly was broadcast galaxy-wide. Humanity was no longer just the accidentals. They were the reckless, ingenious ones who fixed things even with the wrong tools. Fear began to mix with a wary respect. A standard galactic year after the gate opened, the formal induction ceremony was held on the Citadel, the heart of the Galactic Council. The chamber was a vast circular amphitheatre under a dome that displayed a real-time starfield. Representatives of 100 species watched as the human delegation, led by a now-seasoned Ambassador Aris Thorne and a career diplomat named Elias Vance, approached the central podium. Envoy Kale stood beside the council's presiding elder, a being of light and sound known as the Luminal. The ceremony was a recitation of rights and responsibilities. As the Luminal spoke the final words of ratification, the starfield above shifted, adding a new bright star to the constellation of member species, Sol. There was polite, resonant applause. It felt anticlimactic. Humanity was in, but they were still the youngest, most primitive species at the table, tolerated but not yet accepted. The true challenge emerged weeks later. Scouts on the fringe of council space reported an anomaly. A wave of silence was moving through a frontier sector. Communications and probes vanished. It was the Devourer swarm, a ravenous, non-sentient bioship fleet that consumed all matter and energy, a galactic natural disaster believed to be dormant for another millennium. Council military strategy was monolithic: form a unified defensive line at the Hypergate nexus leading to the core systems, the Tellarian junction, and grind the swarm down with coordinated energy weaponry over years of costly warfare. It was the only way their risk-averse doctrines understood. Human analysts, looking at the swarm patterns and the proposed battlefield, saw a terrible inefficiency. The Tellarian junction was a choke point, but it also meant containing the swarm in a region with 3 inhabited, if sparse, systems that would be sacrificed. The Council's plan was a siege, and the first victims were to be written off. The human delegation requested an emergency session. They presented an alternative, a plan born from human military history, from concepts of maneuver warfare, feints, and tactical sacrifice. They proposed not a solid wall at the final gate, but a layered mobile defense, using their understanding of warp shear principles. Now somewhat grudgingly respected, they could create temporary unstable micro-gates as spatial charges to funnel and fracture sections of the swarm. They suggested using fast, automated drones, a crude version of AI which the Council strictly regulated, as targeted harassment, drawing parts of the swarm into pre-arranged kill zones of concentrated fleet fire. It was chaotic, aggressive, and involved calculated risks and retreats. To the Council strategists, it was insanity. The debate was fierce. Elder species denounced the plan as reckless butchery that would fail and doom them all. But the younger species, those whose worlds were in the path of the swarm or near the sacrificial systems, listened. They heard an option that fought to save every system, not just the core. Humanity did not have a fleet to contribute, but they had ideas, and, surprisingly, they had allies. The Silveri pledged their swift, if fragile scouts. The Tokka, impressed by human resolve, offered their tough, versatile frigates. Even a faction of the Verax, logically convinced by the human statistical models showing higher potential for total survival, agreed to participate. The Battle of Tellarian Junction did not go as the human plan predicted. It was messier, more desperate, but it did not go as the Council predicted either. Human tactical officers, embedded in the Allied ships, directed a chaotic, fluid dance of violence. They used the micro-gate charges to create spatial disruptions, confusing the swarm's hive mind. They executed feigned retreats that lured massive swarm tendrils into crossfires. A Verax cruiser was saved by a suicidal run of Silveri scouts, a move of solidarity that stunned the old guard. The final, pivotal moment came when a large swarm element broke through a perceived weak point, heading directly for a support fleet. The human command ship, the Odyssey, had one last untested weapon, a warp-shear projector scaled for ship-to-ship combat. It was a science tool, not a weapon. Aris Thorn, on the bridge, ordered it fired not at the swarm ships, but at a small, dense asteroid in the swarm's path. The space around the asteroid twisted and folded, creating a temporary savage gravitational vortex that ripped the leading swarm elements apart. The Odyssey's systems burned out from the feedback, but the breach was sealed. The swarm, its coherence shattered by the unorthodox tactics, was systematically destroyed. The core systems were saved, and, miraculously, so were the three frontier systems. The cost in ships and lives was high, but far lower than the Council's projection for their static defense. In the aftermath on the Citadel, the atmosphere had changed. The human delegation was no longer an object of curiosity or mild disdain. When Ambassador Vance entered the Great Chamber, representatives from species that had fought beside them nodded, a gesture of respect. The Luminal addressed them not as the new members, but as the delegates from Sol. Envoy Kael approached Aris Thorn one final time before her rotation home. Its iridescent skin shimmered with what human algorithms now identified as muted amusement. "You broke a wall to enter a house," Kael said. "Then you used the broken pieces to fix the plumbing, and then to craft a shield that saved the house from a storm. Your membership was an accident, but your place here now is not. You bring chaos. You bring risk. And it appears the galaxy has grown too comfortable without it." As Aris looked out a viewport at the majestic, orderly spires of the Citadel, she saw a small, human-engineered maintenance drone zip past, repairing a power conduit with a welder design stolen from Martian habitat factories. It was crude, loud, and effective. She smiled. They had not come to the galaxy in glory, but in a blast of mistaken genius. And now they would help fix it, one reckless, beautiful idea at a time.